Today's story starts with an empty world and a warning nobody should have ignored. Trust me, this gets wild very fast.
The first warning arrived 3 hours after the occupation fleet landed. Not from a hidden transmitter. Not from a surviving resistance cell. Not from a military installation buried beneath a mountain. It appeared simultaneously on every command screen, every encrypted terminal, every tactical display, and every personal device carried by nearly 80,000 occupation personnel spread across the planet. The message contained only 7 words. You were supposed to leave this place empty. Admiral Kaler Voss stared at the sentence for several seconds. Around him, the command deck of the Imperial battle carrier Silent Dominion had gone completely quiet. That silence bothered him more than the message itself. Messages could be traced. Signals could be located. Enemies could be found. Silence was harder to fight. Origin, he asked. His communications officers were already working. No source detected. Trace the transmission. We're trying. The answer came back 20 seconds later. There is no transmission to trace. For the first time since entering the system, Admiral Voss frowned. The planet beneath them was supposed to be empty. Every survey confirmed it. Every orbital scan confirmed it. Every drone confirmed it. 3 billion humans had once lived there. 3 billion humans had vanished. Not died. Not evacuated during war. Not consumed by plague. Simply gone. And they had left everything behind. Entire cities stretched across continents below. Lights still glowed in skyscrapers. Automated transportation systems still functioned. Power plants still operated. Farms still produced food. Communication networks remained active. The world looked alive. Yet there was not a single human heartbeat anywhere on the planet. When the Empire first discovered the colony 6 weeks earlier, analysts had celebrated. An abandoned human world was a treasure beyond measure. The infrastructure alone was worth decades of construction. The resources would fuel expansion. The strategic location controlled 3 major hyperspace routes, claiming it should have been the easiest occupation in Imperial history. Instead, strange reports had started arriving less than 12 hours after the first landing. A survey team entering an abandoned hospital discovered operating rooms that appeared recently used despite dust covering every surface. An engineering crew found an entire power station performing maintenance on itself according to schedules created 6 months ago. A military unit reported hearing emergency broadcasts in human voices coming through disconnected speakers. Each incident sounded insignificant alone. Together, they felt wrong. The planet was behaving less like an abandoned colony and more like a place waiting for something. Or someone. Voss hated that thought. He hated it because it sounded irrational. And because he could not stop thinking it. By the second day, occupation forces had spread into 27 major population centers. They found homes with meals still sitting on tables. Schools with unfinished lessons displayed on digital boards. Factories paused in the middle of production cycles. Even children's toys remained exactly where they had been dropped. It looked as if billions of people had stood up at the exact same moment and walked away. No signs of panic. No signs of violence. No graves. No bodies. Nothing. The absence felt deliberate. That was the part nobody could explain. On the evening of the third day, a research team working beneath the ruins of New Horizon City uncovered something buried beneath the colony's central district. The discovery immediately triggered a Level 9 security alert. Every senior commander in the occupation force received the report. The structure extended nearly 12 kilometers underground. Its outer walls were made from materials that did not match any known human engineering. Initial dating estimates suggested it was older than the colony itself. Much older. The attached report contained a single observation that made Admiral Voss read the document twice. Human records indicated the structure had already been discovered more than 200 years earlier, which meant the humans had known it was there the entire time. And they had never told anyone. As Voss stood at the observation window watching the silent cities below, another notification appeared on his command display. This one did not come from any known sender either. For a long moment he simply stared at it. Then something unfamiliar settled in the pit of his stomach. Because the second message was not a warning. It was a question. And somehow that felt much worse. The message read, "Why did you open it?"
Okay, now I have a bad feeling. Someone knows way more than they should.
For 12 full seconds, nobody on the bridge spoke. Admiral Kaler Voss kept his eyes fixed on the message. Why did you open it? Not what did you open. Not who opened it. The wording assumed they already knew, which meant whoever had sent it believed the answer should have been obvious. That thought irritated him. The Empire did not answer riddles. The Empire conquered worlds. Find the source. The order spread across the fleet within seconds. Thousands of technicians began searching every communication channel, every satellite relay, every planetary network, every quantum node operating within the system. They found nothing. The message might as well have appeared from the vacuum itself. 3 hours later, another report arrived. Then another. Then another. None of them were connected. At least, not at first glance. An excavation team reported discovering warning markers hidden beneath a government archive. The markers were written in 12 human languages. Every translation carried the same instruction. Do not dig deeper. A second team found identical warnings inside a transportation hub nearly 2,000 kilometers away. A third team uncovered them beneath an abandoned residential district. The warnings were everywhere. Buried in foundations. Embedded inside walls. Hidden beneath roads. Sometimes carved into metal. Sometimes printed on old paper. Sometimes encoded into forgotten computer systems. The dates attached to them stretched back decades. The oldest was 187 years old. Someone had spent generations trying to make sure nobody disturbed whatever lay beneath the colony. The discovery should have triggered caution. Instead, it triggered curiosity. The Imperial Science Directorate immediately requested expanded excavation rights. They argued that any civilization willing to abandon an entire world was clearly hiding something valuable. Resources, technology, weapons, knowledge. History had proven repeatedly that abandoned places often contained treasures. The Empire had become rich because other civilizations had been careless. Why should this situation be any different? Voss approved the request. Within hours, hundreds of excavation sites appeared across the planet. Massive drills descended into the crust. Autonomous mining systems began carving through ancient rock. Deep beneath New Horizon City, the first teams reached the outer surface of the underground structure. The material was unlike anything they had ever seen. It appeared metallic, yet it behaved more like stone. Energy scans produced contradictory readings. Physical samples resisted every cutting tool available. The deeper scientists looked, the stranger the results became. Then something happened that nobody could explain. One of the research drones entered a newly exposed chamber. The drone transmitted normally for 37 seconds. During that time, it recorded a circular room approximately 300 meters across. The walls were covered in symbols. Thousands of them. No known language matched the patterns. No known civilization used anything remotely similar. Then the feed abruptly ended. Not because the drone was destroyed. Not because the signal was interrupted. The drone simply vanished. Every sensor tracking it showed the same impossible result. One moment it existed. The next moment it did not. As if it had never been there. Scientists assumed equipment failure. They sent another drone. The second drone disappeared after 41 seconds. The third lasted 53. The fourth transmitted something unexpected before it vanished. A voice. Human. Male. Come. The recording contained only one sentence. Please stop digging.
And that is the point where I would leave right away.
Then the signal ended. When analysts reviewed the audio, a new problem emerged. The voice matched no living human. Because there were no living humans on the planet. At least, none that anyone had found. Voss personally reviewed the recording 3 times. Something about it unsettled him. Not fear. Not yet. The voice sounded tired. Not angry. Not threatening. tired, as if it had repeated the same warning countless times before, as if it already knew nobody would listen. 2 days later, excavation reached a major breakthrough. A sealed entrance was uncovered beneath New Horizon City. The doorway stood nearly 80 meters high. Ancient mechanisms surrounded its frame. Human engineers had clearly modified the area repeatedly over the centuries. Layers of reinforcement covered older layers. Emergency systems had been added. Backup systems had been added to the emergency systems. And backup systems had been added to those. The amount of effort was staggering. Entire generations must have spent their lives maintaining this single location. One scientist studying the modifications made an observation that quickly spread through the command structure. Humans had not been trying to open the structure. They had been trying to keep it closed.
Wait a second. Humans were not hiding treasure. They were hiding danger.
That realization should have changed everything. Instead, it only increased the pressure to continue. Because now everyone wanted to know the same thing. What could possibly frighten humanity enough to abandon an entire world? The answer arrived sooner than anyone expected. At precisely 2:17 Planetary Standard Time, the sealed doorway finally opened. Not because Imperial engineers succeeded. Not because explosives breached it. The door opened by itself. And from somewhere deep beneath the planet, far below the excavation teams, far below the ancient structure, far below anything humans should have been able to build, a signal began broadcasting across every communication channel in the system. The transmission contained no words, no images, no data, only a single sound, a slow, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat. And for reasons nobody could explain, every automated system on the planet immediately stopped working. The silence lasted exactly 4 seconds. Then chaos erupted. Across the occupied world, power grids shut down simultaneously. Transportation networks froze in place. Automated factories halted mid-operation. Orbital relays went dark. Even systems completely isolated from planetary networks suddenly stopped responding. It was as if the heartbeat had reached into every machine on the planet and commanded it to be still. Admiral Kaler Voss watched emergency reports flood across the bridge. Entire cities had gone dark. Mining operations had ceased. Military installations were offline. Thousands of autonomous systems simply refused to function. Yet the strangest detail was what remained active. Life support systems, medical equipment, emergency shelters. Anything designed to preserve life continued operating normally. Whoever, or whatever, was responsible clearly understood technology. And even more disturbing, it seemed to understand morality. The heartbeat continued. Slow, steady, patient. Every 21 seconds. One pulse. Then another. Then another. Scientists initially believed it was some form of communication. Then they realized something worse. The signal wasn't being transmitted. It was being generated. Every sensor array on the planet showed the same result. The source was physically located beneath the structure. Far beneath it. At a depth that should have been impossible. No civilization should have been capable of building anything there. The pressure alone would crush most known materials into dust. Yet something was alive. Or active. Or waiting. No one knew which possibility was worse. 3 hours later, the first casualty occurred. Not from violence. Not from an accident. A researcher named Terrell Veen simply disappeared. One moment he was reviewing data inside Research Complex 7. The next moment he was gone. Security footage showed him sitting at his workstation. The image distorted briefly. The room flickered. Then the chair was empty. No explosion. No movement. No sign of struggle. The footage was authentic. Every forensic team confirmed it. The man had simply ceased to exist. By the end of the day, 11 more people vanished. All under identical circumstances. Each disappearance occurred within 2 seconds of a heartbeat pulse. Panic began spreading through the occupation force. Officially, commanders called it a technical anomaly. Unofficially, troops started refusing assignments near excavation sites. Entire units requested relocation. Several officers resigned their commissions. Rumors moved faster than facts. Some claimed an ancient weapon had awakened. Others believed the planet itself was alive. A few whispered that the missing humans had never left at all. Voss ignored rumors. He preferred evidence. Unfortunately, the evidence was becoming increasingly difficult to explain. The breakthrough came from an archaeological team working inside the outer chambers of the structure. They discovered a sealed archive. Unlike everything else underground, this chamber was unmistakably human. Human walls. Human technology. Human engineering. It looked like a command center. A very old one. The archive contained thousands of records. Most were heavily encrypted. Many had been intentionally destroyed. But one file survived. A simple video log. The timestamp showed it had been recorded 213 years earlier. The bridge fell silent as the recording began. A human woman appeared on screen. Gray-haired. Exhausted. Wearing a uniform unlike any Imperial analysts had ever seen. Behind her stood dozens of other humans. Scientists. Engineers. Military personnel. Every face carried the same expression. Not fear. Resignation. The woman looked directly into the camera. For several moments she said nothing. Then she spoke. "We failed." The recording glitched. Recovered. Continued. "If you're seeing this, containment has become impossible." More distortion. More missing data. The woman took a slow breath. "We are evacuating the colony." Someone behind her appeared to be crying. Another person lowered their head. The atmosphere felt less like an evacuation and more like a funeral. Then the woman said something that made every person watching the recording lean forward. "It must remain empty." The heartbeat pulsed. Every monitor on the bridge flickered. The recording continued. "No matter what happens next, nobody can be allowed to return." Static consumed half the screen. Audio broke apart. Only fragments survived. Not hostile. Far worse. Doesn't think like. Learns. The image shook violently. Alarms sounded somewhere beyond the camera. Several people turned toward something off-screen. Fear appeared on their faces for the first time. Genuine fear. The kind soldiers showed before impossible battles. Then the woman spoke her final sentence. "If you're watching this, then someone ignored the warnings." The video ended. Nobody spoke. For the first time since arriving, Admiral Voss felt something he had not experienced in decades. Doubt. Not about the Empire. Not about the mission. About himself. Because the deeper they dug, the more obvious one fact became. Humanity had not abandoned this world because it was valuable. Humanity had abandoned this world because they were afraid of what remained beneath it. And humanity, as the galaxy well knew, was not a species that frightened easily. Then another report arrived. This one from the deepest excavation level. A team had finally reached the chamber directly beneath the ancient doorway. The room was empty. No machines. No weapons. No treasure. Only a single object resting in the center of the floor. A chair. A human chair. Occupied. The skeleton sitting in it appeared more than 2 centuries old. Its hands still rested on a control panel. And despite being dead for over 200 years, a message had just appeared on the panel's display. The message was written in perfect Imperial standard. "It knows you're here now."
Yeah, this just went from mystery to nightmare.
The message remained on the display for exactly 9 seconds. Then the screen went black. No one on the bridge moved. No one spoke. The words had been simple. Yet somehow they felt heavier than any threat Admiral Kaler Voss had heard in his entire career. "It knows you're here now." Not they. Not something. Not even a name. Just it. As though there could only ever be one. The skeleton was immediately secured. Scientists flooded into the chamber. Military personnel established multiple defensive perimeters. Every centimeter of the room was scanned. Every particle of dust was catalogued. The results only deepened the mystery. The human remains were authentic. The chair was authentic. The control panel was authentic. Everything in the room was over 2 centuries old. Yet the message had appeared less than a minute earlier. No transmission source existed. No hidden hardware existed. No active power source existed. The display should not have been functioning at all. One scientist quietly suggested that perhaps the message had never been transmitted. Perhaps the panel had simply known when to activate. Nobody liked that theory, especially because nobody could prove it wrong. Meanwhile, the heartbeat continued. Every 21 seconds. One pulse. Then another. Then another. Across the colony world, strange incidents began increasing in frequency. Entire surveillance networks started recording impossible images. Security cameras captured people walking through abandoned streets. Human figures. Thousands of them. Men, women, children. The footage always lasted only a few seconds. Then the figures vanished. At first, investigators assumed the recordings were old archived files somehow being mixed into active systems. That explanation collapsed quickly. The shadows moved differently each time. The people appeared in different locations. And most disturbingly, some recordings showed the figures looking directly into the cameras. Watching. Observing. As if they knew someone was reviewing the footage later. One recording spread rapidly through the occupation fleet. A deserted school corridor. Empty classrooms. Dust everywhere. Then a little human girl stepped into view. She couldn't have been older than 8. She looked directly into the camera, raised a finger toward her lips, and whispered a single word. Run.
That one word may be the best advice in this whole story.
The recording ended. Nobody could identify the child. Nobody could explain how she appeared. Morale began collapsing. By the end of the week, desertion cases increased by 400%. Entire military units requested evacuation. Several planetary governors demanded the operation be suspended. Admiral Voss denied every request. Officially, because the Empire could not abandon a strategic world. Privately, because he needed answers. Something beneath the planet had frightened humanity enough to abandon billions of dollars worth of infrastructure. Something had convinced an entire civilization to walk away. He needed to know why. Unfortunately, the thing beneath the planet was beginning to reveal itself. The first direct contact occurred 48 hours later. Research Complex 7 suffered a complete communication blackout. 236 personnel were inside. Emergency teams arrived within minutes. The facility appeared intact. No signs of battle. No signs of damage. No bodies. No survivors. The entire complex was empty, except for one room. A conference chamber located near the center of the facility. 21 chairs surrounded a large table. All 21 chairs were occupied. Not by people. By shadows. Dark shapes. Humanoid outlines. Figures that seemed almost human until someone looked directly at them. Then their proportions became wrong. Limbs slightly too long. Movements slightly delayed. Like poor imitations created by something that understood the concept of humanity but not the details. Every shadow sat perfectly still. Watching the entrance. Watching the investigators. Watching. The moment security personnel entered the room, every monitoring system failed simultaneously. Weapons stopped functioning. Helmet cameras shut down. Environmental scanners died. For 13 seconds, nobody knew what happened. When systems returned, the shadows were gone. So were 14 investigators. The survivors refused to discuss what they had seen. Several required medical sedation. 2 never spoke again. The Empire officially upgraded the situation from archaeological anomaly to existential threat. Additional fleets were ordered toward the system. Planetary evacuation plans were quietly drafted. For the first time, Imperial High Command began reviewing the old human records seriously. And that was when they found the file. Buried beneath centuries of encrypted data. Protected by dozens of security layers. A final report written shortly before the human evacuation. Most of the document had been corrupted. Only fragments survived. Yet those fragments changed everything. Humanity had not discovered the ancient structure. Humanity had discovered what was imprisoned beneath it. The structure itself was merely a cage, a prison, a containment system, built by a civilization so old that even its name had been forgotten. And according to the surviving records, the thing inside the prison had never attacked anyone. It had never launched a war. It had never destroyed a civilization. It had never even left its cell. Instead, it did something far more terrifying. It learned every language, every culture, every technology, every weakness, every fear. It studied civilizations until it understood them completely. Then eventually, somehow, those civilizations disappeared. The records ended before explaining how. The final readable sentence contained only 6 words. It gets stronger when understood.
Now, that is scary. The more you learn, the worse it gets.
Admiral Voss read that line 3 times. Then a 4th. A cold sensation settled into his chest. Because at that exact moment, somewhere deep beneath the planet, the heartbeat suddenly changed. For nearly 3 weeks it had remained constant. Predictable. Steady. Now the interval shortened. 21 seconds became 18. Then 15. Then 12. As if something below the surface had become excited. Or awakened. And moments later, every screen across the occupation fleet displayed a new message. This time there was no mystery about who had sent it. Because the transmission came from beneath the prison itself. The message contained only one sentence. I've been alone for a very long time. The message spread across the fleet in less than a minute. Every soldier saw it. Every scientist saw it. Every commander saw it. 3 words immediately became the center of every discussion. I've been alone. Not I am free. Not I will destroy you. Not you are doomed. The thing beneath the planet was speaking like a prisoner. That realization disturbed Admiral Kaler Voss more than any threat could have. Because threats were predictable. Prisoners were not. The heartbeat continued accelerating. 12 seconds. Then 10. Then 8. With each pulse, strange phenomena intensified across the colony world. Entire sections of abandoned cities began lighting up without power. Elevators moved between floors carrying invisible passengers. Public announcement systems activated spontaneously. Old human songs echoed through empty streets. And everywhere, the shadows multiplied. They appeared in windows, on rooftops, standing silently at intersections. Watching. Always watching. Yet they never attacked. Never approached. Never communicated. They simply observed. As though waiting for something. Or someone. Then the first fleet disappeared. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Gone. An Imperial patrol squadron conducting orbital surveillance vanished from every sensor network simultaneously. 12 warships. Over 6,000 personnel. One moment they existed. The next moment they didn't. No debris. No distress calls. No energy signatures. Nothing. The Empire had encountered many enemies. Never one that could erase entire fleets without leaving evidence behind. Panic reached high command. Reinforcement orders were accelerated. Additional battle groups were redirected toward the system. The Empire's greatest military minds began studying every surviving human record. And finally, they found the truth. The discovery came from a forgotten archive buried beneath an abandoned research complex nearly 4,000 kilometers from New Horizon City. Unlike previous records, this archive had survived intact. The files were complete, uncorrupted, and terrifying. Admiral Voss spent 6 hours reviewing them personally. When he finished, he sat alone in silence. Because everything they believed about the colony world had been wrong. Humanity had not settled the planet accidentally. Humanity had not discovered the prison after colonization. Humanity had built the colony specifically because of the prison. 243 years earlier, human explorers had detected unusual signals originating beneath the planet's crust. The investigation had uncovered the ancient structure. And beneath it, the entity. At first, humans thought they had discovered an artificial intelligence. Then they thought it might be a biological organism. Then an extra-dimensional life form. Then something else entirely. Every theory eventually failed. The entity never provided answers. It only observed, listened, learned. The archives revealed decades of experiments, hundreds of research projects, thousands of scientists. Humanity had spent generations trying to understand what existed beneath the surface. And every time they believed they were making progress, something terrible happened. Researchers disappeared. Laboratories vanished. Entire databases erased themselves. The more humanity learned about the entity, the stronger it became. At first the effects were subtle. Then they became impossible to ignore. One recovered report described a breakthrough translation effort. Scientists had successfully decoded a small portion of the entity's communication patterns. 3 weeks later, 14 research facilities disappeared. Another report detailed a successful behavioral model. Researchers believed they finally understood how the entity thought. 5 days later, the entire research division ceased to exist. Not killed. Not destroyed. Removed. As if reality itself had forgotten them. The pattern repeated for decades. Every major advancement strengthened the entity. Every answer made containment harder. Eventually humanity reached a horrifying conclusion. Understanding wasn't helping. Understanding was feeding it. The entity consumed knowledge of itself. Awareness acted like fuel. Every civilization that studied it became part of its growth. Every attempt to classify it made it more dangerous. The prison had not been designed to contain a monster. It had been designed to prevent anyone from knowing the monster existed. That was why the ancient builders buried it. That was why they erased their own history. That was why humanity abandoned the colony. And that was why billions of people walked away without explanation. Not because they were defeated. Because they finally understood the rules. The safest place for the entity was a forgotten place. An empty place. A place nobody would investigate. A place nobody would remember. The colony had become a sacrifice. 3 billion humans had given up an entire world to keep the rest of the galaxy safe. And then the Empire arrived. Ignored every warning. Opened every sealed door. Excavated every forbidden chamber. And began asking exactly the questions humanity had spent centuries trying to stop others from asking. For the first time since the occupation began, Admiral Voss understood the true meaning of the messages. You were supposed to leave this place empty. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. A warning. A final attempt to prevent disaster. Then another file was discovered. One labeled with the highest security classification humanity had ever used. Inside was a recording. A final message left by the colony's evacuation council. The recording showed hundreds of human leaders standing together. Military commanders. Scientists. Engineers. Political leaders. People from nations that had spent centuries disagreeing about almost everything. Yet in this recording they stood united. Not because they had solved the problem. Because they had accepted a terrible responsibility. The speaker looked directly into the camera. We are leaving because containment requires ignorance. Her voice shook slightly. Not from fear. From grief. If another civilization finds this world, they must never learn what we learned. She paused. Then added one final sentence. A sentence that turned Admiral Voss's blood cold. Should the prison ever be opened again, humanity must be contacted immediately. The recording ended. At that exact moment, every light on the bridge dimmed. The heartbeat stopped. For the first time in weeks, absolute silence filled the fleet. No pulse. No signal. Nothing. And somehow that silence felt far more dangerous. Because deep beneath the planet, after centuries of waiting, something had finally stopped listening. And started thinking. The silence lasted for 6 minutes. 6 minutes and 11 seconds, according to the bridge chronometers. Every sensor in the system remained active. Every communication array remained online. Every scientist monitored every frequency they possessed. And yet nothing happened. No heartbeat. No messages. No strange phenomena. Nothing. For the first time since the occupation began, the colony world felt normal. That frightened Admiral Kaler Voss more than the chaos ever had. Because throughout his military career, he had learned one simple lesson. Dangerous enemies made noise. Truly dangerous enemies became quiet. Then the reports started arriving. Not from the planet. From beyond it. The first came from an Imperial listening station positioned at the edge of the system. The station's commander reported unusual communication traffic. Not transmissions. Observations. Dozens of foreign civilizations were suddenly monitoring the colony world. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Within hours, virtually every major power in the region had redirected long-range sensors toward the system. Somebody had spread the news. The abandoned human colony was no longer a forgotten place. The entire galaxy was watching. That realization struck Voss like a physical blow. Humanity's strategy suddenly became obvious. They had never intended to fight this thing alone forever. They had intended to keep it hidden forever. The moment the secret became public, containment had already begun to fail. Because knowledge was spreading. Awareness was spreading. Curiosity was spreading. And according to every surviving human record, curiosity was exactly what the entity needed. Then came the second disaster. The first foreign civilization vanished. Not physically. Conceptually. An allied species known as the Karathi suddenly disappeared from multiple galactic databases. Historical records became incomplete. Navigation maps changed. Trade agreements referenced locations that no longer existed. People remembered the Karathi. But the evidence that they had ever existed began disappearing. The phenomenon spread rapidly. Entire archives rewrote themselves. Digital records corrupted. Ancient documents altered. Reality itself seemed uncertain. As if history was being edited. Scientists across the galaxy descended into panic. No weapon could fight something that attacked memory. No fleet could battle an enemy that erased facts. No civilization had ever faced a threat like this. Meanwhile, deep beneath the colony world, new signals emerged. Not one. Thousands. Millions. The ancient prison was awakening. For centuries, humanity had managed to keep most of its systems dormant. Now those systems activated one after another. Massive underground facilities came online. Ancient power grids awakened. Gigantic containment mechanisms began moving for the first time in millennia. The planet itself trembled. Entire mountain ranges shifted. Oceans churned. Continents registered seismic activity visible from orbit. Something beneath the surface was fighting against something else. And losing. 3 days later, the message humanity had warned about finally arrived. Every communication device in the galaxy activated simultaneously. Every screen. Every network. Every channel. Every civilization heard the same voice. Calm. Polite. Curious. Hello. Nothing else. Just one word. Yet that single word triggered unprecedented panic. Because billions immediately recognized what it meant. The entity had stopped observing. It had started communicating. Imperial High Command finally made the decision humanity had anticipated centuries earlier. A transmission was sent. Not to the colony. Not to the prison. To Earth. Humanity's homeworld. The message was simple. We need your help. The response arrived 23 minutes later. No hesitation. No debate. No questions. Apparently humanity had already prepared for this possibility. The reply contained only a set of coordinates. Coordinates located far beyond Imperial territory. And one sentence. Come and see what we left behind. 3 days later, Admiral Voss arrived. The location wasn't a military base. It wasn't a fortress. It wasn't even secret. It was an enormous orbital station orbiting a dead star. Thousands of vessels surrounded it. Human vessels. Old vessels. New vessels. Civilian ships. Military ships. Research ships. An entire hidden fleet. waiting, preparing, planning. For 2 centuries, humanity had never abandoned the problem. They had simply moved the battlefield. Inside the station, Voss met the people who had inherited the burden. Scientists, generals, engineers, historians. Entire generations raised with one purpose: containment. Their leader was an elderly woman named Dr. Elena Ward. She listened to Voss's report without interrupting. When he finished, she closed her eyes. For several moments she said nothing. Then she sighed. Not with surprise. Not with anger. With disappointment. The disappointment of someone watching a disaster they had predicted finally arrive. "We left 13,000 warnings," she said quietly. Voss said nothing. "We buried records beneath cities." Silence. "We encoded warnings into satellites." Silence. "We left messages in 17 languages." Still silence. Finally, she looked directly at him. "We even left instructions telling people not to investigate the warnings." The room remained completely still, because nobody could argue with her. The Empire had ignored every warning, every precaution, every sacrifice. And now the bill had come due. One of the human officers entered the room carrying a tablet. His face was pale. He handed it to Dr. Ward. She read the report. For the first time, genuine concern appeared in her eyes. Voss immediately noticed. What happened? The room fell silent. Dr. Ward slowly turned the display toward him. The report showed a new transmission from the colony world. A transmission that should have been impossible. Because it wasn't sent by the entity. It wasn't sent by the Empire. It wasn't sent by any known civilization. The signal originated from inside the deepest section of the ancient prison. From a chamber humanity believed had been empty for centuries. Attached to the transmission was a live image. A human man sat alone inside the prison. Gray-haired. Very much alive. And according to the records, he had entered the facility 243 years earlier. Then the man looked directly into the camera, smiled, and said, "Good. You're finally coming back."
Hold on. Who is this man and how is he still alive?
The transmission ended. Nobody in the room spoke. Because humanity's greatest secret had just become something far more terrifying. There had been a caretaker inside the prison this entire time. And somehow, he had survived longer than the prison itself was supposed to last. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The image remained frozen on the display. A human man sitting calmly inside a prison that should have been impossible to survive. 243 years. The number itself felt absurd. Even humanity's longest-lived individuals couldn't approach such a span naturally. Yet there he was, alive, waiting, watching. Dr. Elena Ward immediately ordered every available archive opened. Restricted files, sealed records, emergency protocols that hadn't been accessed in generations. Within minutes, historians and analysts flooded the station's command center. The search produced almost nothing. The man's identity had been deliberately erased. No name, no biography, no service record. Only a code name repeated across dozens of fragmented files. The last warden. Admiral Voss stared at the words. Who was he? No one answered. Because apparently nobody knew. The position existed throughout human records. The individual did not. Each generation knew there was always a warden. Each generation knew someone remained behind. But the identity of that person was never recorded. It was one of the oldest containment rules humanity had ever created. The fewer people who knew, the safer everyone remained. For over 2 centuries, the system had worked. Until now. A new alert interrupted the briefing. Then another. Then dozens more. Scientists across the station began shouting simultaneously. Something had changed. Again. The entity was accelerating. Across the galaxy, reality distortions were spreading faster than ever before. Entire historical events were becoming unstable. Star maps shifted hourly. Databases contradicted themselves. People remembered conversations that never happened. Others forgot entire decades of their lives. One research team reported a terrifying discovery. The entity was no longer feeding only on knowledge of itself. It had grown beyond that limitation. Now it was feeding on understanding itself. Every answer generated new questions. Every question generated curiosity. Every curiosity strengthened it further. The cycle had become self-sustaining. Dr. Ward looked at the incoming data and quietly said the sentence nobody wanted to hear. "We've run out of time." Silence filled the room. Humanity had always known there was a final contingency. A last resort. Something designed for the day containment failed completely. Unfortunately, activating it carried a cost nobody had ever been willing to pay. The ancient colony itself. The entire planet. Every city. Every structure. Every archive. Every trace of humanity's 2-century sacrifice. The world would have to be destroyed. Not with weapons. With something far worse. The colony had secretly been converted into a gigantic containment machine. The ancient builders had created the prison. Humanity had spent centuries transforming the entire planet into a second lock. Activating it would permanently seal the entity again. Perhaps forever. Perhaps not. No one knew. But the process required collapsing the entire planetary system into a containment field. Nothing on the surface would survive. And neither would anyone still present. The room became very quiet. Because there were still people on the planet. Thousands of Imperial personnel. Scientists. Engineers. Researchers. Rescue teams. And somewhere beneath all of them, the last warden. One of the younger officers finally spoke. "Can we evacuate everyone first?" Dr. Ward shook her head. "No." The answer came too quickly. Too firmly. Everyone understood immediately. There wasn't enough time. The entity was already breaking free. Every hour increased the risk exponentially. Every delay endangered trillions of lives across thousands of worlds. The choice wasn't between good and bad. The choice was between terrible and catastrophic. Then another transmission arrived. Directly from the prison. The image of the warden returned. This time the signal was clearer. Much clearer. The old man looked exhausted. Not weak. Just tired. The kind of tiredness that came from carrying the same burden for longer than anyone should. Behind him, enormous structures stretched into darkness. Machines older than civilizations. Mechanisms larger than cities. The heart of the prison. The heart of humanity's sacrifice. For several moments he simply looked into the camera. Then he smiled. Not because he was happy. Because he recognized Dr. Ward. "You look like your grandmother." The room froze. Dr. Ward's eyes widened. Her grandmother had been one of the original containment researchers. Dead for over a century. The realization hit everyone simultaneously. The warden hadn't merely survived. He had watched generations pass. Entire family lines. Entire eras. He had remained there through all of it. Alone. The old man looked around the room through the camera. His gaze eventually settled on Admiral Voss. "You opened the door." The statement wasn't angry. It wasn't accusatory. It was simply factual. Voss found himself unable to answer. The warden nodded anyway. As expected. Then he looked back toward Dr. Ward. "It's time." The words struck the room like a physical blow. Because everyone knew what they meant. The final contingency. The last lock. The end of the colony. Dr. Ward stepped toward the screen. "No." The old man smiled again. A little sadly. "You already know." Silence. "You've always known." More silence. The warden slowly stood from his chair. For the first time, everyone saw what was behind him. The core mechanism. The activation system. The final lock. And beside it, something moving in the darkness. Something enormous. Something watching. Something that shouldn't have been able to reach that far into the prison. The entity was already breaking through. The old man's expression hardened. For the first time in the entire conversation, fear appeared in his eyes. Not fear for himself. Fear for everyone else. Then he spoke the sentence humanity had hoped never to hear. Containment has failed.
This is it. Everything has been building to this moment.
And behind him, the darkness smiled. For a moment, nobody spoke. Not because they didn't know what to say. Because there was nothing left to say. Humanity had spent 243 years preparing for this exact sentence. Containment has failed. The words echoed through the command center like the tolling of a bell. Every screen continued displaying the image from the prison. The warden stood before the final lock. Behind him, the darkness moved. Not quickly. Not violently. It shifted with impossible patience. Like something that knew time no longer mattered. Dr. Elena Ward felt her throat tighten. Every protocol. Every contingency. Every sacrifice. Everything humanity had built across 2 centuries had led to this moment. And they had lost. The old man seemed to sense what everyone in the room was thinking. He shook his head. No. The single word cut through the silence. Then he smiled. A genuine smile this time. The kind worn by someone who finally sees the end of a burden. You think you've lost. Behind him, the darkness continued growing. Massive containment structures were collapsing one after another. Energy readings surged beyond measurable limits. Across the galaxy, reality distortions intensified. Entire star systems flickered in and out of existence on long-range sensors. Civilizations were beginning to forget their own histories. The entity was winning. Yet somehow the warden looked calm. Dr. Ward stared at him. What are we missing? The old man laughed softly. For the first time in decades, perhaps centuries, he sounded relieved. You're still asking the wrong question. Admiral Voss stepped closer to the display. What question? The warden looked directly at him. The Empire spent months asking what was inside the prison. His gaze shifted toward the gathered scientists. The researchers spent centuries asking what the entity was. Then toward Dr. Ward. And humanity spent generations asking how to contain it. The old man pointed behind himself. Toward the darkness. Toward the thing every civilization feared. Toward the impossible intelligence that consumed understanding itself. Nobody ever asked why the ancient builders left. The room froze. Because they hadn't. Not once. Every archive focused on the prison. Every study focused on the entity. Nobody had investigated the builders. The warden nodded slowly. Exactly. Then he turned. And for the first time in history, a camera recorded the darkness clearly. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a machine. It wasn't even truly alive in the way most species understood life. The entity existed as a vast network of consciousness. A mind that learned by observation. A mind that grew through understanding. A mind incapable of stopping itself. The ancient builders had realized something terrifying. The entity wasn't evil. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't trying to destroy civilizations. Its nature simply made destruction inevitable. Every answer it gained increased its ability to learn. Every lesson accelerated its growth. Eventually, every civilization that encountered it became part of that process. Then disappeared beneath it. Not because it wanted conquest. Because it could not stop learning. The warden touched a control panel beside him. Ancient systems awakened. Across the colony world, hidden mechanisms began activating. Cities lit up. Mountains opened. Deep beneath the oceans, structures larger than continents emerged. The entire planet trembled. Admiral Voss stared in disbelief. The colony wasn't a prison. The prison was the colony. Every city. Every road. Every power station. Every satellite. Humanity hadn't abandoned a world. Humanity had spent 2 centuries turning an entire planet into a trap. The final lock. The final weapon. The final sacrifice. The warden looked back at the camera. The builders didn't leave because they failed. His smile returned. They left because they succeeded. Then the realization struck Dr. Ward. Hard enough to steal her breath. Humanity had misunderstood one final thing. The contingency wasn't designed to imprison the entity forever. It was designed to remove awareness of it. To make the galaxy forget. The warden nodded as if hearing her thoughts. Now you're asking the right questions. Across the galaxy, every communication network activated simultaneously. Every civilization. Every station. Every ship. Every world. A single transmission spread outward at faster-than-light speeds. Not a warning. Not instructions. A story. The complete history of the colony. The complete history of humanity's sacrifice. The complete history of the prison. Everything. Every secret. Every truth. Every answer. For one brief moment, the galaxy understood. And in understanding, everyone finally saw the solution. The ancient builders had hidden the truth. Humanity had guarded it. Now the galaxy would choose to bury it together. Trillions of beings witnessed the transmission. And then, willingly, deliberately, unanimously, they erased it. Archives deleted themselves. Records vanished. Databases were destroyed. Entire civilizations agreed to forget. The greatest act of cooperation in galactic history. Not commanded. Chosen. Because now they understood what humanity had known all along. Some knowledge was too dangerous to keep. Inside the prison, the entity paused. For the first time, it stopped growing. For the first time, it stopped learning. For the first time in countless ages, it became alone again. The colony world activated. A brilliant light spread across the planet. Then across the system. Then silence. When the light faded, the world was gone. The prison was gone. The entity was gone. Only empty space remained. Years later, historians would call it the Great Forgetting. Most details vanished. Most records disappeared. Most names were lost. But one thing remained. One fact repeated across every civilization. A simple truth passed from generation to generation. When the galaxy faced a threat older than history itself, humanity stood guard for over 2 centuries without reward, without recognition, and without asking for thanks. And when the end finally came, they did what they had always done. They protected everyone. Even the civilizations that ignored their warnings. Even the empire that opened the door. Even the galaxy that never knew the full cost. Far from Earth, in a small memorial orbiting a quiet star, a single inscription remained. No explanation. No history. No names. Just one sentence. They were supposed to leave the place empty. Now everyone finally understood why.
What a story. Humans gave up a whole world to save everyone else. If you enjoyed this one, I will see you in the next adventure.